Hi there, I'm Lucas Kendall. This is my friend Charlie Vignola. We're back to listen to the sound of our own voices on our screenwriting hour. Good morning, Charlie.
Good morning, Lucas.
All right. So what we thought we would do today, because we're still trying to figure out how to take log lines, is we can talk about a very important topic that somebody put on a screenwriting group on Facebook, which is how do you make a good script great? And let me, I think you saw this, Charlie, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay, let me read. I'll just read this out loud. Why not? I mean, it was in a public group, and the writer is named Mark McDonald. Mark, you're now famous. Congratulations. And he wrote a post that said the difference between good and great. This question may be unanswerable. Recently, I finished a script that I really enjoyed writing. I think it's one of my best. I've given it to a few people to read, some professionals, some just regular people, and so far the reaction has been uniformly positive. Everybody says it's good. Okay, I'll take good. Good is good. But from what I hear, producers, readers, and contests are looking for great. What is the difference between good and great? What takes a script from one level to the next? I have heard in YouTube videos, people mention things like dialogue that's too on the nose, major plot points or beats coming too late, stories being a little too predictable, et cetera, et cetera. Not just talking about my script, but in general, what do you think the difference is? So that was his question. And I noticed that a lot of people answered it, and there were a lot of sort of poetic, sort of answers or theoretical answers. But I thought there was a real practical answer, which I gave, that I won't read, but I thought I would sort of paraphrase some of my thoughts. And I'm counting on you, Charlie, to correct me so I don't give bad advice. And it mostly comes down to something that is essential that people don't want to do, because this advice is all simple, but it's very, very difficult, which is that if you're taking a good scripted great, it's not a matter of nibbling or rewriting or finessing. It's a matter of doing a new script, forgetting about the old one, doing a new script and using the stuff that worked and fixing the stuff that could be better. It's about that kind of iteration. And is that your experience?
Well, I mean, my entire living for 30 years was trying to make good scripts great. That's what I did.
How do you do it?
Through endless drafts of scripts that drill deeper on every element that's involved in screenwriting: structure, dialogue, tone, character, pacing. I mean, there's an endless number of moving parts in a screenplay. And, when we start out developing any project that eventually becomes a movie, we've got to get, a first draft. But before we get a first draft, we have to get a treatment or a pitch. So it's a long journey. And usually, again, the kind of writers that we work with at a company like Jerry Bruckheimer are some pretty top writers. So they're already very good. And so those are the people that we pick or choose to get in business with from the beginning. But every time out, you're kind of like, to some degree, reinventing the wheel. You've got to start from scratch with the project. This is something that maybe you've written a comedy before, but not this particular comedy before, or an action thriller. So you're starting from the beginning, and you're trying to use the principles that you've learned up to this point to construct the story that you're going to tell. And generally speaking, we don't even let you write the draft until you've come up with, an outline or a treatment that feels sturdy enough, solid enough, that we're like, okay, you've got a good blueprint now for a first draft. Go write it. And then, 12, 14 weeks later, you come in with a first draft. Now, again, because these are writers that are professionals that are represented by major agencies, they're very solid writers, but still it's a first draft. So when you're putting a first draft together, even if it's from a great writer, it's like there's still a ton of things that don't work about it. There's probably a lot that does, but as you were pointing out, Lucas, when you start rewriting the screenplay, you want to kind of keep the good stuff, but you want to improve the stuff that's not working so well. And a lot of stuff cannot be working so well. It could be awkwardly structured. The characterization could be a little flat. Dialogue can be clunky. There might be a lot of logic issues. So it might be readable. It might be generally solid. It might be good, quote unquote, but it isn't great. And great is what you're hoping for to get to the point where a director is going to want to come on board, say, and devote the next 2 years of his life to your project, or the studio is going to give you a green light and open the spigot to give you $100 million budget for that script. And they're not so quick to do that these days, or ever. So you're constantly working with the writer to take what's good but improve what needs work, draft after draft after draft. And the whole point of this process is, obviously, if the writer could do that single-handedly, there wouldn't be a whole system of production executives, who are trying to bit by bit improve the material. Now, I will say, and some of you out there might suspect that, Terry Rossio's word player website has a column called Crap Plus One, where the basic theory is, I saw that movie and it was crap. So all I have to do is write something that's like just as good as that, or maybe a little bit better, and I should be golden. Well, sometimes the development process, for a variety of reasons, takes like a screenplay that could be very good, and then it even becomes great at a certain point in the development process. And then when a director comes on board, when actors come on board, when the studio starts giving, when marketing comes in, when you start doing like test screenings after the movie is shot, things might change enough that even that great screenplay that was great at one point in that entire development process, for a variety of those reasons, might get watered down. So maybe the movie that comes out at the end of the process isn't as good as it once was. But there was a point in the development process where it was great, because it had to be great to get all these people on board. And then sometimes all those people's input does make it better. There are those movies, obviously, there are a lot of those movies. Sometimes it's kind of like a break even, it's different, but not necessarily better. And sometimes it does indeed make it worse. But that's the broad sort of superstructure of how it works at the professional level, basically.
So you had the benefit of working with top flight pros. And I think I was trying to think of some advice that I used on my own stuff to try and get it to a professional level. And I'm sure people are thinking like, why am I listening to this person with barely any credits? And it's a good question. Always ask that question. Look, I have right now, I wrote something that's good enough that it's sort of being circulated in some sort of development process, and I don't want to talk about it. But what I've learned from my own work is that to take something from good to great, you have to look at your initial concept, and you have to look at the initial few decisions that you made when you were translating that idea into a script. And it might be an idea as basic as, who's the protagonist? Is it a period piece or is it not a period piece? Does it have who's the antagonist or who isn't the antagonist? I'm talking about you going back to the basic math of how you were taking that really cool idea that you thought is worth spending 6 months to a year writing, and you said, well, and what happens, what people do, I know this is what people do, is that they use what sort of the first thing that comes to their mind that captures their imagination. They go, of course, that's it. And then they think about who's the antagonist. When they think of the first thing that comes to mind, they go, that's it. And they think of the set pieces and, oh, that would be cool. And so they have this soup of stuff, and then they go ahead and write the script with this soup of stuff. And what they don't do, because no one likes to go backwards, is think, are these really the best choices? And that must be what you do in the professional development process, but you're doing it with pros who, I think, as a matter of course, for one thing, they have tons of experience. When you get to a professional level, you don't have to write it to kind of see how the chessboard would play out. If our hero is an old person, it has certain thematic baggage. If the hero is a woman, it has certain thematic associations. If the hero is a kid, it's going to have a certain tone. So these choices, what I think writers do at the break-in level is they use their instincts in these different areas without really realizing that these won't mesh. And they'll,
Right.
for example, something they'll do is they'll want to have a movie that with an old person as the protagonist for whatever reason. They like The Wild Bunch, I don't know. But they will project the emotions and the wants of a younger person into that older person, but it's not going to work because older people have a different set of experiences, a different set of relationships. That's just one example. I don't know. Does this take it away, Charlie?
No, that's true. Here's the thing. Again, when you're an aspiring screenwriter, you're sort of doing all this without the luxury of like an entire team helping guide your development. So really, you're doing it on your own, or you're doing it maybe with the help of a few close friends who hopefully are writers or at least good readers who can kind of give you feedback. And if you were, I don't want to say if you're smart, if you wanted to save yourself a lot of time, you would try to do as much of this as possible in the planning phase rather than after you've written the draft. Because, writing the draft does take a long time, especially if you're an aspiring screenwriter. If you're a professional screenwriter, then maybe you can write a draft in 8 to 12 weeks and get it done quickly. But if you're sort of figuring it out as you're going along, but if your blueprint is faulty from the beginning, then you're working from a faulty journey outline, and that's going to show when you're finished with the draft. And then if people read it, they're like, wow, why did you make these decisions? Why did you make these choices? Which would have been better to sort of walk through it mentally and creatively when you're first building your outline. So I think over time, that's one of the things that writers kind of learn is that, unless you're Stephen King and you never write an outline, and that's what he says, but, most other writers, before they sit down to commit to a book or commit to a screenplay or a TV pilot or whatever it is, they are working with index cards, and they're working with outlines, and they're working in a writer's room, and they're basically doing what they can to create a solid an outline that will serve them well. And as Lukas was saying, that you picked the right protagonist, you're telling the right story for that protagonist, you're exploiting your premise the best way possible, all of those things. And so each individual writer is going to have to figure out how do I do that? How do I build my own sort of support system, writer's room, outlining process to help me do that? Because, while you're right, Lukas, you can totally do a page one rewrite, endless amounts of time to one idea. If you can prevent that process, because it takes a lot of time, and sometimes you can't. Early on, you can't. Obviously, early on, you're just learning this the hard knock way by just slogging through it and doing various drafts of the script. But a lot of first-time writers, just crossing the finish line is a big deal, right? I mean, if you've never written a screenplay before and you finally get to 115 or 122 or whatever, and you're just like, I finished a script. It's like you think it's like finishing a marathon. You're done. Go get a drink of water, go hang out with your friends. It's like, no, but you've got 3 or 4 more marathons that you've got to run after that. That's the thing. You're not done after that first draft. You might think you are if you're writing for the first time, and you're just the accomplishment is so huge that you just want to kind of bask in it and give it to everybody to read. And maybe when you're starting, again, you either don't know it any better or you haven't built that team yet. So, you're going to do that, and you're going to think and you're going to hope that you're going to get great accolades for your first screenplay. And, some family and friends will probably give you praise and not focus so much on the stuff that's wrong with it. Although the stuff that's wrong with it is kind of what you want to work on. And with anything, with each successive draft and with each successive new idea, you're going to get better. You're going to get better if you were learning an instrument or bodybuilding or whatever long-term project you're embarking on. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. If you keep watching movies, if you keep deconstructing how they work, if you keep reworking your material, and good, if we're talking about making a good script great, right? Good means it's not embarrassing. That's what it really means, right? Good means it's readable. It works. It hangs together. But it ain't great. And you know what great is? Great is something where you watch a movie and you're just like, God, that was so entertaining. That was so funny. That was so thrilling. That was so cool. I want to watch it again. I want to tell my friends about it. This was such an entertaining experience. And really any movie or any script that gets to that level, it's not the first draft. It was reworked, over time.
Oh, yeah. I've had that process of working with a partner who was a real pro, did like 100 Law and Order episodes. And at a certain point, like I couldn't follow along anymore. I just had to say, you drive. And I was just in awe of the technique and the simplicity and the ability to make things real and the ability to get rid of things that are phony and get rid of things that are not important.
Right.
So some principles for getting a good script to a great are, you want the movie to be the story on the page. And if there's too much stuff that's referred to or in the backstory that's more interesting than the movie that you're actually writing, then there's something wrong with the structure. Because people do that. We all get to a point where we've sort of written ourselves into a corner and like the characters are starting to joke about how ridiculous the situation is that they're in. If that happens to you and you're starting to write that line of dialogue, stop, because you screwed up the structure. I swear, I believe that's true. And if you get to a point where, oh, here's something else that people do, because I read a lot of these and they're not very fun to read because they're not very well written. People are so like, they process and learn I got to show, not tell. So what they do is they write scripts that like the first 30 pages are all these scenes that are boring because they're just exposition. It's like, I have the cops chasing the guy because I'm showing that he's a fugitive. Okay, well, that you've shown me that he's a fugitive, but you're also showing that he's trying to get his kid. I'm trying to show you that he has a kid. Okay, but this is just exposition. Exposition sucks if it's the only point. It's kind of hard to explain. But...
Well, this is good, Lucas. So I'm working on I'm going to post this on YouTube at some point in the near future, but I went through the movie Back to the Future's opening scene, right? The very, very first scene of the film. And it is a marvel of concision, foreshadowing, and how to write like a really interesting opening scene that establishes so much for the rest of the film. But again, it was not the first, second, third, 10th, 12th. It was the movie that got made. It went through a lot of changes, and you couldn't have an opening scene like that movie has without having gone through all the permutations and per the drafts to get there. And so I basically, like, we're watching the scene in real time, and it's about a 5-minute opening scene. I don't know if you remember what the
I do, yeah.
Scene, but the very the very opening scene is like, you see the title Back to the Future, and for a long time it's one continuous shot of Doc Brown's laboratory where we basically are opening up on clocks and we're panning the clocks. And as you're seeing the different clocks, it's like, okay, clocks, time, it's establishing it's about time. And you move across the scene and there's a guy hanging from the arm of a clock tower, which is foreshadowing of Doc Brown later on hanging from the clock tower. And then you keep moving to, from the clocks to a where there's like a couple of like articles from a newspaper that are tacked to a wall, and the articles are about there was a fire at Doc Brown's house, obviously the result of an experiment gone wrong, and then he sold off like the estate, which means he's got money problems. He clearly is not doing very well. And then you look, the camera lowers to like a little cot in a corner. Oh, this guy is like, he's living this kind of like, very low rent lifestyle right now. And then the camera moves past a clock radio where there's like a past due notice on top of it, which is like he can't even pay his bills. And then the clock is talking about Statler Toyota as having a sale on cars and trucks, because in another scene or two, you're going to see Marty talking about the truck that he wants. The whole 5 minutes is like that, where bit by bit by bit, you're getting all this, quote unquote, as you're pointing out, exposition. Yes. But look how they're doing it.
But people take the wrong lesson from this, because how many scripts start with the family photographs and then somebody's sick and then there's a missing spot in the photograph. It's like, because it's,
well, if you do it bad,
if
obviously.
you do it bad, because that's ordinary. The thing about Back to the Future is that
Right.
all these things they're interesting because they're unique, they're different. It's not just a family photograph with a missing
Right.
person.
Right.
Like people, yeah, how many people use the TV news for the exposition? Like,
Right.
don't do that. It's a mistake. Like, do not do that. If you're doing that, something's wrong. And how many times do people write their scripts where it's somebody waking up in the morning? You know,
A lot of people used to do that. I see it a little bit less now, but you're right. I mean, but look, any of those things are obviously cliches, right? But it depends on how you recombine those cliches, or how you put a twist on them, right? Any of those things are fine if you find some way to sort of like go beyond what you're expecting. So if the audience is seeing something you're expecting, good, again, if the contrast is good to great, right?
Yeah.
Good would be you show the cliche, and the cliche, it works because you've seen it a million times before. It's like what you're criticizing is it's familiar, but it's not weird. It's not bizarre. It's like, it's fine. It works. Works is good. Great is you take those things and they're elevated in some way. They take the thing you're expecting, something unexpected with it. The unexpected is what makes it clever or novel. By the way, this goes for premise level, like your idea for a movie too. As we talk about, like, you know, a guy whose child is kidnapped and he has to get the child back. That's not a movie. What's the twist on that? Well, ransom is an example of the twist on that. I'm not going to pay a ransom to get my kid back. I'm going to pay a ransom to put a bounty on you, the kidnapper. That's what I'm going to do. That's a twist. That's kind of interesting. So, you know, in any of these movies, it's two people meet and fall in love, and they have a bunch of travails and obstacles to get together at the end. Is every romantic comedy in the world, every single one. That's the plot line or the arc of a romantic comedy. How you get there, the journey or the premise of like how those two people meet and fall in love. It could be splash. It could be big. It could be, you know, there's a million variations on the rom-com, but how they meet, how they kind of fall in love, what the difficulties to their story are, or what makes that particular story unique. You have that at the premise level if you can. If you don't, then you have a Nora Ephron movie. You know, you have something like that, which is extraordinarily well done. But it's like if somebody says, "What's the premise of a Nora Ephron movie?" Generally speaking, it's like, you know, two older people meet and kind of like fall in love and they have issues, but there's no big idea behind the romantic comedy. And that goes again for every genre, no matter what it is.
I have another suggestion for taking something from good to great. And as with the previous suggestion, unfortunately, it's not magic. And it usually means you're going to be pulling something apart and rebuilding it better. And the suggestion is to look at the human implications of what you've written and think about the assumptions you're making for this character. And then it's just the most basic question in the world. What would somebody actually do? What would somebody actually feel? Now, movies are not reality. We know that. Characters are not people. They're characters, which is something Aaron Sorkin said. They're simplified and pointed in ways that real people aren't. But it has to come from a human place. I like how many people write the scene in the principal's office where the principal's a jerk because they internalize the wrong thing. Just like they internalize, I'm going to show, not tell. So I'm showing all this stuff that's really not that interesting because I think I'm doing exposition the way you're supposed to. They think, well, movies have to have a lot of conflict. So I'm going to make all the characters be really mean and difficult to our protagonist because that way there's more conflict for her to overcome. But it only makes it fake because people aren't like that. Real people are passive aggressive. Watch The Sopranos for the best ever passive aggressive behavior. They're caring in ways, you know, but then they're avoidant. So real human relationships have all these mixes of passive aggression and avoidance and lip service to caring and actual caring. But they happen in weird ways and they happen in emotional ways. And if you just stop and think, if I'm making this kid whose dad died and he's a sad kid, what if he's so repressed that he's going out of his way to be happy? That's more interesting. It's probably more real. You know, what does the trauma of your concept actually do to, would it do to a real person, and then play with
Well,
that.
that's a good point. Look at the movie Terms of Endearment. I always remember this in terms of
Genius.
endearment. Remember, in Terms of Endearment, she's got two young boys, two sons. And one of the older of the two sons is a jerk in that movie. He is really mean to his mother, really mean, just like a complete jerk. But it's like the kid's going through trauma. You know, his parents are not getting along and they're arguing, and the mother is just dying of cancer. You know, the younger boy is kind of like more innocent, and the older boy is like taking it out in a way that kids sometimes do, which is like, you know, they're not so sensitive, and sometimes they are very self-centered, and that felt very real when you watch that movie. That it hurt, it breaks your heart when you're watching it, because you want the kid to be nice to his dying mother, but the kid's not so nice to the dying mother, and the mother is trying to deal with it, and you're just like, that does feel real. That feels real to me.
Well, Jim Brooks is a, like, genius level emotional storyteller.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, please look at broadcast news, look at As Good as It Gets. I mean, this is the pantheon. I mean, it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, broadcast news is another example of that, right? I mean, very sophisticated storytelling with characters who are complex and multidimensional, and don't follow sort of easy cliches. And they all have, in that movie, every one of those characters is kind of damaged and has like pretty huge Achilles heels, right? All three of those characters there. So it's like, you know, that's what makes that movie an Oscar. When you want a good script, great romantic comedy, that would be an example, right?
And so the psychology of being a writer trying to do this, I'm just talking about my own experience, but I would be very confident that it applies to others, is that, you know, if you have the passion and the drive to actually become a fiction writer, you know, there are things that you want to express, and you want to have control over these worlds that you're creating. And I think that it made me uncomfortable with the idea of losing control by having things go into uncomfortable directions. It was when you're actually giving agency to your characters to behave like real people, it's almost like, but I'm doing this to escape reality. Reality is not very nice to me. So I want my world to do what I want it to do. And it's hard to then think, wait a minute, these feelings that I'm trying to escape by being a storyteller, you mean I have to face them in my work? But it's even worse, because then I don't have my mom or my wife or my friend or my boss to complain about. It's all me. It's all versions of me. It's very, very raw and painful. And you just got to force yourself to suffer through it, I think.
Well, again, it's the joke in Woody Allen. We talked about this in one of our previous, shows about, when he's breaks up with Annie Hall and at the end of the movie, and then he writes a play about their breakup, but in the play they get back together again, and he turns to camera and he says, what do you want as my first play? When you're doing art, you want to make it work, because it's like really hard to make things work in life. And thing, like when you're trying to plot a movie broadly, like, for instance, like you're writing a romantic comedy and there's a scene where the husband and wife get into a fight about some petty issue. You know what the beat is, you don't know exactly what they're going to fight about, but that's where the good to great comes in, which is like, they're going to get into a fight about something. The funnier you can make it, the more relatable you can make it, the more that these two characters both have a point of view that makes sense, is going to make that scene a scream. And you're going to remember that scene where, the husband and wife are getting ready to go out to dinner. Wife is trying on clothes and she's worried that she doesn't look good in the clothes because she thinks she's fat. And the husband knows there's no right answer to this. And one way or another, he's going to make one tiny comment that he means to be a good comment or a positive comment, and she is going to blow it out of proportion, and that is going to become the fulcrum for a major divorce level event fight. That thing is going to be. So the more that you can draw from your own experiences, the more that you can make it specific but universal in a way that is funny, but every guy and every girl are going to turn to each other in the audience and go, yep, that's you, that's me, that's you, that's what it is. The better off your script is going to be. And every scene obviously can't be that. I mean, if you're writing some sci-fi action thriller, they're not all going to be like that. But as you just said, how does a real person behave in those circumstances? Like, what would a real person do? You know, one of the reasons why movies like Scream became popular after all the slasher movies was because what did they do? The characters in that movie deconstructed how the characters in horror movies behaved, which were ridiculous. And they were commenting on it. And it was kind of meta, but it was very clever and very funny, and also made those characters feel real because they're kind of inhabiting a movie like we've seen, but they're commenting on the fact that, well, we know about those movies too. So like, maybe let's not all split up, and maybe let's act in ways that like are a little bit less than a movie, slasher movie ridiculous, but it allowed them to put a twist on the slasher movie cliches and still create interesting set pieces. That's why Scream is a classic and a great movie, better than maybe a good slasher movie like, My Bloody Valentine or Happy Birthday. Now those are crap, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there are good slasher movies, then there are great slasher movies, and then there's something like Scream, which is like something completely different. And Scream, if you remember, I don't know if you remember this, I'm sure Lucas does, it created an entire subgenre of like, Scream meta slasher movies that were in the vein of Scream, but none of them were ever as good as Scream. But Urban Legend, I think, was one, and Idle Hands was one, and there were a bunch of movies that Scream kind of kicked off because it was great.
Yeah, it's so hard to do what we're suggesting because, as you pointed out, you have to like build up all your confidence just to think, I can do this, I can write a script. And then you have to shatter that confidence and go in the other sort of direction of the I know nothing. And I have to start from scratch, and I have to reconceive. I have to question everything I just came up with. But that's the emotional toughness that you need to do this well. And the only way you get it is from the experience. And it's always that delusion of this next draft is going to be the good one. And then thinking it's perfect, it's my baby. And then having somebody read it and they hem and haw, and you go, oh, I'm just as stupid. I'm just as stupid as I was 12 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or whatever it was, that I thought I had figured everything out. And it's just, you just have to see the long game, that if you stick with it, and if you keep learning. What I decided that I would crave all feedback, even if it was terrible and stupid, and just train myself not to have any emotional reaction to it, except emotions that might be useful for processing feedback to the work, because I figured that this is such a competitive environment that if I was completely uninhibited about taking feedback, I'd improve quicker and I'd have an advantage, which I thought made sense.
You found a way to sort of deaden your emotions to criticism. You basically found a way to take ego out of it and just listen to people's opinions, because there's no such thing as a wrong opinion if you're giving it.
Yeah, I just trained myself to, no matter what the feedback was, I just trained myself to go, thank you so much. Thank you for spending time with it. This is great. I really appreciate it. And then it's funny, like if you just say those words, it does actually start to shape your emotion. And then you are, yeah, I am grateful that this person read my terrible script and actually gave me thoughtful notes. And then you just stop.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this.
Yeah.
Anybody who's reading your screenplay is devoting 2 hours of their free time to do you a favor. And that's a big deal. It's as big of a deal as asking somebody to help you for 2 hours. I mean, it's mental instead of physical, but it's still time you'll never get back. So every person that does that you deserve to hear what they have to say. Because again, maybe they're not, hopefully some of them are writers and they can like give you feedback on that level, which is obviously valuable. But like I said, I when I write something, I divide it up between some of the people who read it are writers, some of the people who read it are civilians. That might be family and friends who are not writers, but they still watch movies. That's the majority of people who are going to go see your movie are not fellow screenwriters. They're people who just want to be entertained. They want to sit down and they want to watch something after their long, crummy day to either feel, to laugh, to feel romantic, to be excited, to be shot with adrenaline, to be told a really moving story. They're going to want to get out of their average Groundhog Day, every day, misery, and just see something that's really entertaining. So that's your job. So if you're giving your screenplay to some of those people who are like, well, listen, I'm not D.H. Lawrence, but I'm somebody who watches movies, so I can read your screenplay and I can tell you like, yeah, I like parts of it better than others. Okay, what did you like? I like this, that, and the other thing. What did you not like? I was confused by this. This took too long to get going. The pacing felt off. It wasn't funny enough. Listen to that. And again, if enough people tell you the same things, if there's overlap in the notes, those are the things you should really focus on. Right. Because, if 10 people give you 10 opinions, that's not helpful, obviously. Yeah. So when that happens, I think you take from that what resonates with you, which is like, I didn't think of that. That makes sense. That's interesting to me. Whatever that note is from that person, maybe I disagree with 90% of what they said, but 10% of it, yeah, that could be clearer, or that joke doesn't really work, or that's an awkward character moment didn't feel real. It felt kind of hokey, whatever. So you work on that stuff. But that's the thing that's going to make a good script great. Sometimes you have to ask for questions if you're asking a civilian what they liked or didn't like, because they might not immediately articulate what it is that didn't work for them. They know something wasn't working, but you sometimes have to ask those questions like, what did you think of the characters? What did you think of the dialogue? What did you think of the pacing? What did you think of the big idea? What did you think of the premise? What did you think of certain set pieces? Or, you're trying to kind of feel around to get a more detailed sense of how they responded to your material, so you can address the parts that don't work as well. I mean, presumably, if you're going to write a play and finally finish it, parts of it are going to work, hopefully. I mean, there are going to be things about it that do work, but there's going to be a ton of stuff that probably needs to be made better. And it's nice, obviously, for the ego to hear the parts that worked. That makes me happy. But but I want it to be better. I want more people to like it. I want there to be less criticism. So what are those things that are holding you back from really embracing it and really loving it? And by the way, if it's premise level, then you should have done your homework. You should have test marketed that premise before you sat down to write it for 6 months, because that's always
I've always had a hard time outlining. I know it's important. I try very hard to do it. I just find that I discover too much once I'm actually writing the scenes that it changes the outline. But we know about this. It's just it happens to everybody. I was just making notes, so I can remember what to say. I think people should be the most suspicious of feedback that's positive. That's too positive. For one thing, that if you use like Screenplay or a lot of these coverage sites, they tell their readers, who may be very inexperienced, they tell the readers, don't be too discouraging because we want their business, because they'll just go somewhere else. So you could very well get stuff that says, you're great, you moved me, this is great, I love this, this was hilarious, and maybe look at these 3 things, and then you think, wow, I'm almost there. This happened to me. Yeah. I got burned by false positives.
I can back this up. So stop me if I've told you the story, Lucas, or anybody out there in TV land. One of my very first jobs that I got when I moved out to Los Angeles and I needed a job was in the back of one of the trade papers like Backstage or Dramalog at the time. There was a company that was looking for people to read material, to provide feedback to aspiring writers. This was basically my first gig writing coverage, although I didn't know what it was called at the time. And they hired me because why wouldn't they? I mean, it's fly-by-night company, as I later found out. And that was exactly the marching orders, Lucas, that you just mentioned, were what were told to me at age 21, which is, well, we want them to come back. We want them to be repeat customers. So what you want to do is you want to be, encouraging, and you want to, try to put the best slant on everything possible so that they keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And again, because I was like a 21-year-old knucklehead and I didn't know anything about Hollywood, I mean, I gradually realized that these guys were disreputable. And the guy who was running the company, I found out over lunch at a diner that he was, he had one produced slasher movie in the early 70s that he had written or produced or something, like something you'd never heard of whatsoever. But this was his claim to fame that he's been eating lunch on for like a couple of decades, and what made him a professional. And so after like a month or two of doing that, I was just like, I can't do this. Now, that was this one company. There are many of such companies as this still to this day. And they've gotten more sophisticated, and they have, better websites, and they have a better sales pitch. But there are obviously a lot of them, which is the reason that Lukas and I continue to say the majority of such operations are not worth your time, not worth your money. A few are. Do your research. It's easy enough. You're on Google now. You can look up these things. You can find out who they are, where they've worked, who recommends them, what they've actually done, to determine if they're going to be helpful to your career. But buyer beware. You have to do a little bit of research. But yeah, Lukas is absolutely right. There are a few too many of those operations that are out there just to kind of take advantage of aspiring screenwriters, and that's pretty grumpy.
That sucks. That's why we're doing this show for free. This is all sincere. We are old-fashioned Hollywood liberals and dads, and we actually care about our fellow writers. We care about humans, and we care about the world.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So a third thing, that to take a good script to get to great, my first thing was, don't be afraid to blow it up. In fact, probably you will have to blow it up. That's just development. 2 was, look at the human behavior, look at the human relatability, and use that to rebuild everything. Find the thing that resonates as being the most real, even if it's science fiction, even if it's horror. You can have aliens landing from the sky and eating everybody's head, which obviously has yet to happen, but then people will accept it. But if your protagonist runs into a burning building for no reason, people are going to go, that's fake, because it is. You got to give people real reasons to behave the way they're going to behave. And you have to not just use the first thing that comes into your head, but actually think, is this guy a jerk? Is this guy lovesick? Is this guy, what is the thing that he wants? You want an active protagonist who wants something. A real movie is, I'm looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And the amateur script is, well, I was trying to take a vacation in Cairo. I kept on running into these wacky people, and some of them were Nazis. And then on page 90, somebody put this ark in my hotel room. Everybody's passive. You got to make an active protagonist who wants something. If you're Scott Turow, you can write Presumed Innocent with a passive protagonist and it'll work, but you're probably not. You're going to try.
Right.
So the third thing, Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
People do things backwards. They do plot and try to make the story work around the plot because they think they have these really clever plot points. Like, what if he picks up the clue is this, and that's a really cool clue, and that's how he goes to the house and finds the kid. Do plot later. Do character and story. The human stuff, the character stuff, the story stuff is where the heart is. It's where the movie is. The plot, you're the writer, and you can make up any plot as long as you justify it. You have to make it believable, and you're going to have to build the stuff in that you need so they buy it. But the plot, don't just do plot because it's easy. You can control it because it's just world circumstancy type things. Do that after. And that's why it's hard. That's the hardest thing to do, to get the plot that most elegantly conveys the meaning of the characters in the story that are what you want to share with people. Right?
Okay. I'll push back a little.
Okay, good.
Okay. And especially because, what I did for a living is frequently the reverse.
Okay,
you'll find an intellectual property, a concept, a toy, you'll find a concept first, and then you will have to figure out who are the characters that convey that concept, and how do you build the emotional through line that works within the body of that story. Now, a lot of times we do it badly. And if we do it badly in Hollywood, then you get a bad film, obviously, right? I mean, it's like, well, we need to make a movie out of the Milton Bradley game Battleship.
I was going to say.
Well, you know what, we're going to hire a big director, we're going to spare no expense, we're going to, get Taylor Kitsch, an up and coming star, we're going to shoot it like a big Michael Bay movie, and there are aliens, even though that had nothing to do with the Battleship game, and we'll construct something that ultimately doesn't work. But if you do something that does work, then you get the Lego movie, or you get 21 Jump Street, or you get, like, there are ways to basically take the project, you take the plot, you take the premise that's interesting, and you figure out the best character to inhabit that plot, and you figure out a character arc that makes sense to reflect and refract the plot that you're trying to use as the vehicle. And that's how a lot of Hollywood movies get made. And there are, again, if you do it well, then it's brilliant, then it's great. If you do it badly, then it's bad. The way I personally, as a writer, when I'm not a development executive, when I'm coming up with ideas, I come from premise. I come from big idea. I come from that. Then I try to figure out, based on that big idea, because I know that the character journey, as Lukas is mentioning, and you're right, is absolutely critical to making the good script great, because that's what makes it great, is that the characters are resonant, emotionally compelling, relatable. There's a satisfying character journey, so that there is an arc, that they're different at the end than they were at the beginning as a result of this adventure that we're watching for these 2 hours. That's critical. But I also know that when it comes to getting somebody even read your script, to get somebody to watch your movie out of the million movies that are on Amazon or Netflix, to get a very busy agent, manager, studio executive to want to read for 2 hours your script, that idea better be effing brilliant. Great. So the idea itself, the premise, the plot, whatever you want to call it, the high concept, the log line, but it's not it. The log line comes after you've written the screenplay. It's not what you think of. You're talking about the premise of the movie is really what you're talking about.
Well, I wasn't. I was talking about the plotting.
Yeah, the plotting. But so again, since there's no right way to do this, you can come from either perspective. You can basically say, I've always had this interesting character. I've just got to figure out what to do with that character. Now, there are a lot of movies that get developed that way from TV shows, from a character. In TV, this was done all the time to develop sitcoms. Roseanne Barr has a great act where she's a harried average housewife, and she tells jokes that are very resonant to average housewives. Well, Hollywood said, God, she's brilliant. We want to develop a TV show about her. But now we've got to build an entire world around that persona, that character. So now we need characters, we need stories to tell. And that's how you get, the Seinfeld TV show, the Roseanne TV show. That was a thing that was done for many years. That's how you do a TV show around a persona. It didn't start with a plot first, but there are plenty of shows that start with plot first. X-Files would be an example. There's this division of the US government that investigates UFOs and paranormal phenomena. Okay, that's a high concept. That's a brilliant, interesting, I've never heard of that before. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Wouldn't there be some division of the FBI or law enforcement that would investigate weird things? Sure. Who are your characters? Who are the characters that make up this unit? Okay, well, it would be interesting if the guy running it believes in the phenomenon, right? So he has a kind of like an internal drive to want to like prove that these things are not, just crazy people talking, they exist. And maybe it makes sense because in his own backstory, something strange and unexplainable happened to him or somebody he loved that drives it. Oh, good. How about his sister disappeared when he was young and he thinks that she was abducted by aliens and that drives him. Okay, but then you need the partner, and they can't both believe because that's not interesting. You need conflict, right? So how about if the partner is a woman, but she's more like, Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs. She's about logic, things that are grounded. She doesn't believe in the crazy stuff, but she gets assigned to work with this guy who believes in crazy things. And it's this dynamic between the two of them that's going to make up the core of the show. That's how you go from a good idea to a great idea. It's the interaction of these two characters over the course of the episodes that make that such a compelling show. Because then what X-Files did, it was so good and so successful that it spun off countless, you can't even remember them, ripoffs of X-Files. And they almost all of them tanked after
what I was talking about would be as a bad example, like I want to have a sequence where they go into a dark haunted house type place. So I'm going to have my character be afraid of ghosts. And that way he doesn't want to go inside. And what my point is that I wouldn't do it that way. I mean, do it that way if it's that important. But if having her be afraid of ghosts isn't going to combine with all the other parts of her character that you've created, don't have the plot be the fixed point and then force the character into your plot. Do it the other way around. Right? So have the circumstances of the plotting of the people going into the set pieces, have that be mutable. Because you're the writer and you can invent any reason. And sometimes you have to, you have to disguise it, you have to foreshadow it, or you have to build it into it's raining. Every movie has all that stuff. It's if somebody coughs in a movie, it means they have cancer and they're going to die.
Yes.
And it's all, that stuff's bad too, but you can get away with it in Tequila Sunrise. There's that great, Bob Town, it's a little incoherent, that movie, but I remember there's a plot beat that has to do with these guys are using different radios and they get confused. And so one of the Mexican cops says something into the wrong radio, and that's how the bad guy hears it, or the good guy hears it. I can't remember, but they set it up that, hey, you guys be careful of those radios. You can plan these little things, but if you think, what I'm saying is, you think of that and it's cool and use it when you need to use it. Don't have your whole character or your movie revolve around this cool little plot beat that you thought of with the radios. If you can use it, use it. That sounds cool, but that's not as important as the person. So do the person first and have the stuff and the gadgets and the tricks revolve around the people in the order that works for the people. The people are more important than the stuff. And that's my point.
And that's another example of good to great, right? Look at the James Bond franchise. There have been dozens of movies over the years with different Bonds, right? But for the most part, James Bond movies were kind of plug and play, right? He was a suave.
It was a TV show.
He was a suave ladies' man who got called in and said, "Bond, we need you. There's a bad guy. He's doing something horrible. Go do what you do." And Bond would go out there, and inevitably there was some, wealthy dude who had some crazy plot to take over the world, and Bond would inevitably bed women along the way until he kind of figured out what the bad guy was doing and then stop the bad guy. And they're fine as kind of wish fulfillment, escapism. For decades, they worked perfectly fine that way. So what happened? There was a movie called Casino Royale that introduced the Daniel Craig Bond.
First, there was a movie called Jason Bourne, Bourne Identity.
Right. So there were other kind of espionage franchises before they did Casino Royale that were pretty well established, like Bourne, even Mission Impossible. There are a number.
They upped the game, right? And they had to make Bond up this game. Yeah.
So then they reintroduced Bond, and so how do they go from good Bond to great Bond? They do great Bond. Yeah, they do great Bond because they hire a great writer who digs a little bit deeper into Bond's psyche and Bond's, motivational drive and Bond's sort of relationship to women, and creates a Bond story that for the first time in memory treats Bond kind of a little more realistic than just kind of a wind-up toy going through the motions. He actually has some emotional connection to a woman and loss when she dies, spoiler alert. And so there are a lot of things going on in the movie that kind of really make Bond for the first time in a long time feel like a person rather than a collection of cool elements.
That scene on the train.
Right.
I remember seeing that scene on the train and going, whoa, this is different. This is really different.
And so for the first time in the Bond franchise, actually, the Bond movies under Daniel Craig were actually all connected. It wasn't like plug and play adventures disconnected from one another, which is kind of the way it was with every
Well, it
prior
used to
Bond.
be like a TV show that had a 2-hour episode every 3 years.
Yes, basically.
Yeah.
Basically, that's true. And so that's what it took to get Bond to go from good to great. And there are a number of ways to describe good to great, to keep circling back to this, right? You know, a good slasher movie is one that, you know, is diverting for an hour and 40 minutes. That's good. A great one is one that is seminal, one that is elemental, one that is the scariest one you've ever seen, one that basically shakes it up and kind of defines the format so well that everybody's kind of chasing that thing, and it inspires a bunch of imitators because it did it so incredibly well. So that's one way to make something good to great. And another good to great, as we keep talking about, is the character element. Like it's a good sci-fi movie, but what makes it great is like the character, not just that the sci-fi idea was cool, but that the character journey for the characters was so relatable and compelling and engaging.
Which movie?
That like it took us through it.
Which movie?
Right?
Which one?
I'm saying like any great sci-fi movie.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you could say Clockwork Orange is a great science fiction movie, right? It's a complicated movie because the guy is a scumbag, like he is a vandal and a troubled kid and just like a complete a-hole. But like there's kind of philosophical elements to it that are kind of interesting, which is, well, what happens is he goes through this sort of like program that kind of like reprograms this kid to take away his will, makes him into a perfect citizen, but it basically like it's a dystopian state where it's like, okay, we kind of liked him because he was charming, but he would beat up people and rape people. He's a very anti-hero.
Kubrick's fascination with the inhumanity of man's institutions, and the idea that you could dehumanize a person by taking away the humanity of his wanting to beat people up because he has these passions that are violent and destructive. And but the magic trick of when you empathize with that horrible kid,
right?
It's, I mean, newsflash, Kubrick was a genius.
Kubrick is a genius, and the funny thing is he flies to what we're kind of talking about in the sense that like he's notoriously chilly when it comes to his characters, right? No matter what the movie is, it could be The Shining, it could be Full Metal Jacket, it could be Eyes Wide Shut, it could be any of those movies. He's notoriously chilly when it comes to character, but he's a filmmaker, a director that's interested in concepts and ideas and did them so well again, and that he was a singular filmmaker.
But here's a point I want to make, and you know this, his first few movies were not 2001. His first few movies were like crime thrillers in New York. So he started to get to make good, efficient thrillers, make them cheap, make them good, and build your audience and build your reputation. You don't have to start out, he was Stanley Kubrick from the beginning, but you don't have to start out that way. You just need to deliver. And so it's, if this is too sour to say, your stuff's probably not good enough and you need to work on it, and I don't even know you, whoever is listening to this, it's probably right. I would say that about myself. And I like my own work, but it's now that I've gone through this process of just blowing up my script 7 times in a row, I got to the 8th one, and I was like, I wish I had been smarter earlier, but I'm glad I stuck with it, because now I know, don't make those same mistakes of clinging to things that are incompatible with itself. You got to kill your darlings. You have to evolve. You have to let go of the things that as an amateur writer you were infatuated with for whatever reason, because it's just a process of iteration and evolution. And that's how you get from good to great, through hard work and being tough. Good to great is always a process of revisions, unless you're just an absolute genius. And I want to say, even if you're an absolute genius, Picasso went through many stages, many phases of his career. He learned, you usually learn by
again, imitating what you like. And then you become a genius when you take the language of the thing that you like and you recombine it in ways nobody has really thought of before and elevate it. And no matter what the creative endeavor is, it could be art, sculpture, music, sports, television, and movies. The vast majority of it is fine, good, watchable. It's fine. There's a very small 10%, maybe 20% substrate of that is great, classic, groundbreaking, influential. I think it's called the Pareto Principle. It's like, 80% of everything's crap. And that's true. And by crap, we kind of mean it's serviceable. Even for all the years that I worked for Jerry Bruckheimer, most of the writing samples that we would get are from major agencies. And which means that somebody's already weeded through and read through tens of thousands of scripts to get to what you would think of as the cream of the cream of the cream. And even amongst those people, they're all right. They're all solid. They're all serviceable, generally speaking, to be represented by a major agency. But like, there's only a handful of Aaron Sorkins or Paul Haggis's or, people who reach that level of, or J.J. Abrams for that matter, that reach that level of the business. There's tons of writers whose names you don't know that are cranking out material that you enjoy, and they're very solid. They're very solid. But there's only a handful of David Chases out there. And those are the people who make the entertainment that becomes influential and drives other people to want to do that because The Sopranos is so great, or The X-Files is so cool, or whatever it is that you're watching, and you want to jump into that pond. And, if you're going to even aspire to be a professional screenwriter, which means somebody who gets work, what you're aspiring to get to is a certain professional level with your work that a development executive like me could read. Yeah, they can write. So it's like, they're pretty good. Obviously, you want to get the best people, but they're mostly booked up for years in advance, or they're rewriting scripts for Steven Spielberg, and you're just not going to get them. But so then if you can't get them, then you get somebody who's not them, which is like, okay, they're not that, but they're pretty damn good. So let's work with them. And then you start developing screenplays with them. And again, they're going to go through pitch sessions with you, and they're going to write treatments and outlines. And they do that because, again, you want to get as much of it working as possible, at least theoretically, before they sit down and spend time writing for 12 to 14 weeks, because you're paying them real money, hundreds of thousands of dollars at that point. So you want to make sure that the first draft they hand in is at least a usable blueprint. But the aspiring screenwriter, like we keep saying, is not going to have the advantage of that whole infrastructure, that whole system to get them there. So they're going to have to figure out, well, what's my mini version of that? Who are the going to rely on for reads? Excuse me. What's going to be my system for outlining, projects? And again, if you're a Stephen King writer and you're just going to sit down and start writing a 120-page screenplay, and you don't want to outline anything, and you don't want to do any treatments, God bless you. Maybe you are Stephen King. So most people are not Stephen King.
We've hit around an hour, and I have one last point I want to make, and then of course you should say whatever. When I look at like the Reddit screenwriting or those Facebook groups, it's always like, how do I get a manager? How do I do this? Who do I email? What contest do I enter? And it's all like way upside down. I mean, if it's 90%, I'm looking at how do I get someone to read my script, and 10% of like, hey, did I do this right? It really should be the other way. I mean, put 95% of your effort into making the script great, because even if you do connect and get read, it doesn't matter. It's not going to help you. It's not going to help you even to win a contest if the script isn't there, because people go, oh, that's interesting, and it's not going to do it. You're probably not ready to be read. And when you are ready to be read, it won't be that hard. It feels, I mean, right now I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I don't want to talk about my circumstances, but it is hard and it's frustrating when you know you've got a good script, and it is hard not to be able to inject it into the business. But I did inject a good script into the business, and just the nature of the business is that it's taking a long time. And I guess that's the circumstance I'm in right now, during which it's not really cool for me to try and inject other scripts into the business because I have to respect the partners I'm already working with. But when I did have this script that was good enough, I gave it to a friend. He thought that's good. He gave it to his representation. They thought that's good. And that's how it happened. But if I had given it to my friend and it was not that good, it would have been like, oh, well, better luck next time, or thanks anyway. The material has to be there. And if it is there, you can get it read. You can use one of the reputable coverage places, and they'll kick it up to people. You can email managers. We've given that link before for a guide. You can go on Twitter and just follow the hashtag screenwriting and just start following people and start chatting and saying, hey, I'm a writer who wants to do a script swap. And they'll do it. And you can meet other people, and sooner or later you'll meet somebody who has a connection with a manager. It can be done, but you're probably doing it prematurely. And the final point I'm going to make is that something that used to happen to me when I was really putting it together and figuring out how to get the stuff up to a professional level is that I would finish a draft. I would buy coverage for $60 or whatever. Before the coverage even came back, I would go, I know what I did wrong. And then I was already rewriting it, and then the coverage came back, and it was usually what I figured out myself. The only person who's really going to teach this to you is you. And that's because you can spend $1,000 on some of these coaches or these access programs or these coaching programs, whatever it is, and maybe that works for some people. Nobody, you can give somebody $100,000 and they are not going to be able to teach you how to do this if you're not ready to learn, if you're not at the place where you can make the mental and emotional leaps in your work, in your own process of being tough on your work. And that's work that you can do yourself for free, costs nothing except labor. And you have to do it. There aren't shortcuts. So that's my point.
Right. And following up on what you just said, and we can't say this enough, you're not going to have a second chance to make a first impression. If you're going to use connections that you have in business, and eventually, if you talk to enough people and you're online enough, eventually you're going to meet some people who have connections that have connections, and that's how you network. And if you go out prematurely with your material and it's not ready, they're never going to want to read your material again. It's hard enough to get them to spend 2 hours to read your material to begin with. To give them something that's not ready, the only thing they're going to remember is, I had a horrible first date with that person, and I'm going to use any excuse in the world to not go out on another date with that person, which is why it's so important that, again, if you're just starting out as a writer, build your own aspiring development team, however you do that, of readers who are both like fellow writers and civilians, and also preparation before you sit down to write. Make sure the idea has been test marketed with some of your friends. Do they think it's a cool idea? Ask them honestly. Hopefully you have more than one idea, but talk to them about it and find out what they think is really cool, and then focus on that. And then before you sit down and open Final Draft or whatever you're using, think about it, walk through it. If you use index cards, great. If we're working on the iPad and you're just doing bullet notes, great. But walk through different permutations of it and try to figure out, like, what is the story you're telling? Who's the best character for that? What is the character arc? Mentally walk through it as much as you can before you sit down to write your first draft, because those things, the great premise and sort of like a good kind of blueprint before you write, will be immeasurably helpful in saving time. You're still going to be rewriting it multiple times, but it will save you some time up front.
Cool. All right.
All right.
Well, I hope that feels hopeless and discouraging enough to all those people watching us. Thank you for spending the time with us. I kid because I love.
Yeah,
I do.
Thanks for joining
I really do care. I really do kid because I love, because I did this. I spent money on quack consultants and in stupid contests. And I wish I had reconnected with Charlie sooner. I wish I had listened to people who were giving me real feedback. I wish I had not written the stupid bad idea 20 times. But, you know, we only have the gifts that we have. But good luck. Good luck.
All right.
Truly
Thanks,
good luck.
gang.
Thank you, everybody. Okay.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.